Discourses by Mayor Baba, Volume 1, Selfless Service, pages 129 to 133, revised 6th edition, reading by Alan Ray Powell. Selfless service. Karma yogi avoids chaotic activity as well as inaction. The karma yogi avoids the chaotic activity of selfish desires as well as the apparent inaction of utter non-wanting, but he leads a life of selfless service in which there is not the slightest alloy of any personal motive, and which furthers the release of divinity in all phases of life. Unintelligent service creates chaos and complications. It is very important that service, even when it is utterly selfless, be guided by spiritual understanding, for selfless service, when unintelligently handled, often creates chaos and complications. Many good persons are ceaselessly active for public cause through social institutions. But what does not that activity lead to? For one problem which it solves, it often creates 10 other problems owing to the unforeseen and uncontrollable side results of such activity. Worldly men try to counteract evil through opposition, but in doing so, they often unconsciously become authors of other evils. Suppose a group of ants has climbed onto the body of an individual and one of them bites him. He might instinctively want to punish it by killing it. But if he were to strike it with his hands, he might, in so doing, kill many other ants which were in no way involved in the biting. In trying to secure justice against one ant, he is thus inevitably drawn into an activity which means injustice to many other ants. The man who is drawn into the vortex of public life through a generous impulse without having mastered the art of pure service finds himself in a similar situation. He may be selfless, but his actions create chaos instead of harmony because he has not learned how to render real and effective service without creating complications. If action is to be a pure blessing for the universe, it must be born of consummate understanding of life. Those who come into contact with me should develop true understanding of life and cultivate that type of service which creates no complications. Selfless service based upon understanding. When service is rendered in a selfless spirit, it always benefits the karma yogi, although he himself does not do it for the sake of any reward or result. There is no doubt that even when he renders selfless service unintelligently, he derives some spiritual benefit thereby. But in doing so, he cannot avoid causing much unnecessary suffering to others. However, when he renders selfless service with spiritual understanding, it not only confers spiritual benefit upon himself, but also promotes the material and spiritual well-being of others involved. Selfless service must be based upon understanding if it is to be an unmixed boon for all concerned. Apparent service sometimes really disservice. That which is looked upon as service by ordinary persons might, under special circumstances, be considered as disservice by the master, for he has an unerring knowledge of the situation and a deeper grasp of its spiritual demands. Hence, though it is normally an undeniable act of service to give food to those who are needy, there may be some qualifying circumstances which, in a particular situation, require that the needy person should not be given food for his own good. The tendency to beg for food as charity creates undesirable sanskaras, and in feeding a person who comes to you with this tendency, you may help him to increase the burden of such sanskaras. So, though you may appear to do him good by offering food, you may in reality be successful only in binding him further. Though it may not have been your motive to crush him under obligations, you may in actuality be doing nothing else when you are charitable, not through understanding, but through habit. What applies to the above instance of giving food also applies to the dispensation of many other things, tangible and intangible. And though, from the narrower point of view, a thing may definitely seem to be nothing but service for the act of the recipient, it may, from the higher point of view, be a definite act of disservice to him. Just as what is nourishing to a healthy man may be poison to a patient, what is generally good for people may be an evil for some particular person. Hence, intelligent charity requires profound understanding of the spiritual needs of the situation. Even unintelligent service confers spiritual benefit. But all this should only make more careful and discriminating in their service. It need not discourage their spirit of selfless service. It is true that only a master can be unerring, engaging the spiritual demands of any situation. But it would be a pity if those who cannot be so sure about their judgment withheld their spontaneous urge for selfless service, lest they might unwittingly render a disservice. It has already been made clear that even when a person renders selfless service unintelligently, he always derives spiritual benefit through it. Service rendered with utter detachment. In fact, from the spiritual point of view, the real danger in service lies more in the possibility of your rendering it from a false motive than in making a mistake about the spiritual demands of the situation. If you render service in order to oblige a person, and if you feel proud of doing it, you are not only doing spiritual harm to the recipient of your service, but also to yourself. If, while serving, you take delight in it and develop pride in doing a good thing, you are getting attached to your act and thereby binding yourself. Just as a man may get bound by an iron or golden chain, so also a person can get spiritually bound by his attachment to evil or good deeds. Hence, the way to remain free from karma is to remain completely detached in service. The consciousness, I'm obliging someone, is the first to occur during the process of serving, but it can be annulled by the contrary thought, I'm obliged by being given this opportunity of serving. This latter thought facilitates the attitude of detachment and secures freedom from the bondage of good actions. Service based upon comprehensive understanding is not only service and adjusted to the spiritual demands of the recipient, but is rendered with complete detachment. Such service takes the aspirant to the goal most rapidly. True service begins after realization. The value of service depends upon the kind of good which is secured through it. Ministering to the bodily needs of others is service. Cultivation of the intellect of others is service. Feeding the hearts of people is service. Satisfying the aesthetic requirements of society is service. All these forms of service are not of the same value, even if they are accompanied by a spirit of selflessness. The kind of well-being which is sought through service will depend upon the vision of the person, and he who has the clearest perception of final good will be in a position to render the most important and valuable type of service. Those who have not found the supreme truth are incapable of this highest type of service. Their service cannot have the same value for creation as the service of a person who has arrived at finality in spiritual understanding. In a sense, true service begins after realization. Serving Master facilitates enlightenment. Nevertheless, the spirit of service, which is invariably present in aspirants and good persons, can be harnessed and creatively utilized for spiritual purposes if it is allied with the work of a master. The master serves the whole universe out of the finality of his infinite consciousness, and those who serve the master and obey him also have their share in his universal work. Their service has the advantage of his wisdom and insight. Willing participation in the work of the master not only raises the value of service, but creates the best opportunities for spiritual enlightenment. Service originating in the instructions of the master is second in importance only to the service rendered by the master himself. Service to be free from attachment to results. For most persons, the idea of service is inextricably bound with securing certain definite results in the objective world. For them, service consists in the removal of human suffering or illiteracy or other difficulties and handicaps which thwart the flourishing of individual or social life. This is the type of service rendered by aspirants, politicians, social reformers, and other good persons. Though this type of service is of immense spiritual importance, it is in its very nature unending. In spite of what any individual might attain in these fields, there always remains much that is to be achieved. Therefore, As long as the idea of service is thus tied to the idea of results, it is inevitably fraught with a sense of incompleteness. There can be no realization of infinity through the pursuit of a never-ending series of consequences. Those who aim at sure and definite results through a life of service have an eternal burden on their minds. Service after realization is essentially different from service before realization. On the other hand, service, which comes after realization of the truth, is a spontaneous expression of spiritual understanding of the true nature of the self. And though it also brings about important results in the objective world, it is in no way complicated by any longing for them. As the sun shines because it is its nature to do so, and not because it wants to achieve something through shining, the God-realized person also lives in a life of self-offering because of the basic structure of the divine life, which is at the heart of reality, and not because he longs to achieve anything. His life is not a reaching out towards something with the hope of some kind of attainment. He does not seek enrichment through attainments, but is already established in the fullness of the realization of the infinite. The overflow of his being is a blessing to life in other forms, and actually brings about their upliftment from the material as well as the spiritual point of view. As his own happiness is grounded in the realization of divinity within him, it does not suffer any diminution due to the imperfection or suffering of life in other forms. And his consciousness is not tinged by the ache of something unrealized. That is a vast gulf between service before the realization of the truth and service after realizing it. The life of the master is a life of service. It is a perpetual offering to other forms of his own self. But this service, which is characteristic of the life of a God-realized person, is essentially different from service found in the lives who have not realized the truth. Jai Baba.